Welcome back to another episode of Corralling the Chaos. Today we're going to talk about things you start and maybe don't finish. So how many times have you bought something and it just sits in your garage? Or, maybe you were so excited about it, you bought it, you brought it home, you put it in the garage, and then you never picked it up again. You never did anything with it. Every time you walk past it, you're like, hey, I need to get that out. At some point, you were really excited about it, bought it because you knew it was good for you. Hopefully, that's often the case. But yet you continue to just kind of leave it to the side. Or if you're like me, how many times have you maybe ever gotten a prescription filled, went to the effort, picked it up, brought it home, but never even took the medicine, even though it was good for you, right? For whatever reason, you just didn't see it through. Today, we're going to talk about software implementations because recently we've been talking to a number of companies who have invested heavily in a CRM, an accounting system, maybe even an ERP. And for whatever reason, they just can't seem to get it off the ground. They know they should, but for whatever reason, they seem to struggle with that. So today we've asked Thomas Hudson to join us. He is our Director of Implementation here at LASSO, and he's got a lot of experience in helping companies do that, not just with LASSO, but others as well. And so he's going to help us kind of dive into some of these reasons. So welcome, Thomas.
Hi, thanks for having me. I feel just a bit targeted by your intro because the closet behind me is full of books that I have not read yet. My wife likes to remind me. No, but I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Yeah, I wanted to have you here because, obviously you're on the LASSO team. You work very closely with all of our LASSO customers, getting them up to speed on all of our various products. But I feel like you've probably got a good pulse on why companies get very excited about buying a CRM, buying LASSO, buying something. They know it's good for them. They know there's an ROI, but for whatever reason, they just kind of hesitate. So that's what I want to talk about today. But before we begin to unpack that, tell us a little bit about your experience, because I know you've been doing this well before at LASSO as well.
Of course. So I have been in the software as a service space for a bit over a decade now. I spent the overwhelming majority of that in the implementation and onboarding space as a contributor to teams, helping new clients, and then stepping into leadership and building and growing these programs. So I'm excited to talk. I think there's, in all of my companies that I've worked for, consistent themes for clients that do really well and clients that maybe don't do as well. So I think there's a lot to learn in getting into some of those examples.
So why do you think so many companies struggle with buying something and then never getting into it?
The clients that I've worked with that struggled, funny enough, did not struggle with the buying part. I think the owner really understands the vision and what they need and where they want to go and some of the challenges they have. Where some of those companies have struggled is either A, to remember those pain points when they get busy, probably B, more importantly, to get the rest of their team on board with that why. So they have a vision for where they're trying to go and why we're making this switch. And without communicating that vision, they've passed the buck to their team and their team's not quite as engaged. And so just kind of struggling to make the team understand why we're doing this, what's in it for them, what problems they're trying to solve.
I think about the CRM example because so many, especially leaders, invest in a CRM, right? And then the salespeople and the recipient, they're expected to adopt it, but they feel like, this is just more work for me to do. It's going to, it's just their way to micromanage me. Whereas in reality, a CRM should be an enabler to make more money, an enabler to stay organized and to stay on top of your prospects, right? It's not executive leaders trying to make sure that you're micromanaged. It should enable you to sell more. So I think that's a great point to make sure that leadership is talking about the why and the what's in it for them, not just what's in it for the company, but why is it good for them? And hopefully also leaders are buying software with their team in mind and not just the business, but how will this make my team better? How will we enable our teams to do better work and to do their best work? So I think that's really interesting. Well, I would love to hear, what are some of the patterns that you see? Like when you think about some of the best implementations that you've done over your entire career, not just LASSO, what do those companies have in common?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the best teams and the best projects will take the time early on to really get to know what the client's going through, what those problems are, what those goals are. So clients that are open to having those conversations with our team early on, and they're really willing to share what's going on in their business, it just helps strengthen the partnership that we have with them. But beyond that, it's bringing other stakeholders into the phone call and into the meetings early on, people that we're going to be working with to get things up and running. Conversely, clients that connect everything through a single thread typically challenge more. So if we're bringing in people from the sales team, bringing people in from the warehouse team, things like that really early on in the conversation, it helps. And then just making sure everyone knows who's doing what, when they're doing that, why they're doing that, really helps things move along at a quicker pace.
I think that's really interesting. I'm sitting here now I feel like the spotlight's on me because I'm feeling guilty too, because, even when I think about some of the software that we have bought at LASSO early on, I felt like I had to own that, right? Versus delegating, like, I made the decision to buy it. I think it's going to be good for our company. And I felt like I had to own that by myself. And only when I started bringing others into the fold to say, hey, this is why we wanted to move forward with this platform. Here's what we think it will do for the company. Here's what we think it will do for you, versus feeling like you have to do it on your own. There's so many other stakeholders that have something to gain by getting that up and running successfully. So I think that's a really good point. How should companies be measuring if their implementation is going well and is successful?
What I would love to see clients do, and what we work to do early on in our partnership with new customers at LASSO, is to find exactly what success looks like. So not just, I want to work more efficiently, right? That's great. That's where we're trying to go. But I'd like to be able to do this specific task faster, or I'd like to be able to produce this in a group setting instead of, in a silo, whatever that thing is. I want to be able to define that really specifically early on, so that as we get into training, as we get into coaching, as your team's going through testing, they have something really tangible to do. Some clients are going to come in and they are excited, but they get into the system and they don't really know where to go first. So coming in with a really solid plan and saying, these are the things that we're trying to accomplish, not only helps your team have some direction, but also helps my team help your team.
Are there common things, like when you think about companies that are coming on board to LASSO, do a lot of them have the same goal in mind, like the same definition of what success looks like? Or is there commonalities among that, or does it vary?
There are, for sure. So we like to say that every company is unique, but your problems aren't. We see a lot of the same challenges over and over. And we're talking about a ton of manual processes. Any manual process opens you up to risk of making errors. We're all people. We'll make errors. So we have a lot of manual processes that we want to work through. We want to work more efficiently. We want to work as a team and collaborate on things. We want to be able to work in a single environment so that Team A can just continue the process and hand off to Team B in a really smooth way. All of those things are really challenging to accomplish without a system. And so people coming in typically have those same pain points.
That makes sense. So we talked about commonalities among companies that are doing it right, where the implementation goes well. What are the pitfalls that you see that are most common that could cause an implementation to go off the rails?
This is my soapbox. No, I'm kidding. I think that in some cases, it's just the inverse of the successful client. And that is someone that has all of the vision for why they're doing this, but they're not communicating that vision to their team. Their team in turn feels like this is homework, busy work. That's a huge challenge because we have to get them to engage to the system as well. If we have a single thread, I've seen owners come in and they're excited and they pass it off to person A, and then person A goes on vacation. Person A is busy. Person A, whatever happens, they leave their role, and we've lost that person that's helping us steer the ship. So a single thread, a lack of a shared vision, but also I think a lot of people they're comfortable committing the money, but they're not comfortable committing the time. Right, and making sure we get into training, that we go to the coaching calls, that we take the time to test in the system. And it's not a huge amount of time that we're asking, but there is a commitment to get in and learn how to use the system so we can effectively use it. And some people are more willing to spend money than they are willing to spend time. And that's a challenge. We liken it to a gym, right? You can pay for the trainer, you can pay for the really nice gym that has all of the equipment and the sauna. If you don't actually show up and go into the gym, it's not going to help you. And we see the same thing happen over and over again.
What have you found that's successful to continue to bring them into the fold and to keep them engaged?
I like to encourage, if we do have an owner come in first, I like to encourage them to bring in a key stakeholder from each of the major departments. I want to get them involved in the conversation early on about some of the challenges we're trying to solve, so they see the why. Maybe if that hasn't been communicated on their end, we can help communicate that. I like to set some of those more specific goals. Clients are coming through and they have this big idea of what they want to accomplish. I like to try to find maybe a small actionable goal that we can do, and that can be with the whole organization, or we could be with the warehouse team, it could be with the sales team. And I like to set up regular checkpoints where we're making sure everyone's delivering the things that we should be delivering, whether it's early on when we're talking about delivering data, whether it's a little bit later on the process when we're talking about getting into the training and testing your workflows, things like that.
How do you balance that? Right at the end of the day, they're the customer, they've paid for it. How do you balance that with holding them accountable, right? It's like a parent, like, I'm going to hold you accountable to this because I know it's best for you. But how do you do that?
I like to start the conversation really early on, but what I tell clients is, look, my job is to help you be successful. And so I'm going to take that job really seriously. And that means that we need to have the data by this date. We need to make sure we're in training by this date. Your team needs to be required to take training. We need to make sure we have coaching calls set up. We're covering this, and that. But effectively, what I've done is in a capacity, joined your organization. We have the same goal. It is you effectively using the platform. So if you don't, then I'm failing. And so I'm going to take it really seriously. And I'm going to call you out if we're missing something. And just creating that tone early on of like, look, I'm going to be an accountability partner. I'm going to make sure this works, and I'm going to call you out. And almost all clients are on board. They laugh about it a little bit, but they're like, yeah, let me know if things are missed. And it's just creating the expectation really early in the process that I'm going to bother you if we're sliding off track.
Yeah, I love that they laugh because, we're all guilty of it, right? So it's kind of like, okay, hold me accountable, because there's no shortage of things going on, especially in the event space. So I'm sure it's hard to prioritize implementing a CRM, implementing LASSO, doing those sorts of things. I always laugh because my husband worked in telecommunications, and I think I was the last person to own a BlackBerry. Because I was so like, I don't have time to learn this iPhone. I don't have time. And this was years ago. And I think I may have been the last person. And now it's like, I laugh because I'm like, oh my God, why did I take so long, right? Of course it was good for me to move to an iPhone, but so many times we don't know what we don't know. And so I think having somebody there to just kind of show you the way, encourage you, hold you accountable in the right way is, I think, really, really important. Well, for our audience who is going through software implementation, again, whether it's an ERP, a CRM, I know a lot of people in the industry are moving CRMs right now, moving to LASSO, whatever it might be, what are some flags that they should look at and say, this maybe is not going as well as I thought? Like, what are things they can do, and what are things they should be, that they're observing, and what should they be doing about it to kind of get it back on track? So they don't wake up 6 months from now and say, oh my gosh, what happened? We used to have our weekly calls, like at what point do things start to slide? What are some of those kind of indicators?
A well-defined implementation and onboarding process, and I'll say the process we have at LASSO, has really tight checkpoints throughout what we're trying to accomplish in each stage.
Tell us about that tight process.
Our process is broken into 3 stages: implement, train, coach. We have a very specific focus for each of those groups. The first is collecting data and making sure all the technical configuration and importing is completed. Then we move on to train the entire team through a number of channels. And then we move on to one-on-one coaching, where we work to close gaps and make sure we're talking about your team's specific workflows and getting them really actively using the platform the way they need to. The reason why I bring that up is because we're going to talk you through that process early on, and we're going to work together to have a mutually agreed upon plan of, we expect data by this date, we expect launch by this date, we expect training on these dates. So when we think about what an owner can do, or what someone on their team who's kind of overseeing things can do to make sure we're not going off the rails, we have those dates in mind. So I would understand who's owning what part of your work. If someone's owning the crew data and someone's owning the asset data, well, we know that it should be delivered by, let's say, this September 20th. And if it's September 18th and they haven't touched it, that's not good. And we need to make sure they're getting in and pulling the files they need. So the checkpoints that LASSO is providing and saying, hey, this is the typical flow, should help whomever is steering things on the client side to see, hey, we missed that milestone. Hey, we missed that next toll gate.
In the event industry, sometimes people don't have time till sometimes it's 2:00 in the morning, right? Events are 24/7, 365 days a year. So I think if someone is buying software, I think it's important the accessibility to content, and it's not just a Monday through Friday, a phone call with somebody, because people work, different hours. So talk to us about the various ways people can access content and some things that they should be looking for if they're looking to buy software as well.
Yeah, so we have a lot of ways to get information that are not directly from a person. That's important. First, the reason that you just mentioned, and I want to talk about it more. It's also important because when you do finally meet with a person, you want to work on strategies and best practices that actually make a difference and not logging in. So we accomplish a ton of fundamentals through first written kind of step-by-step guides that have screenshots and steps really clearly laid out. We have in-product tours where you can click through the workflows that you're going to be doing in the system, and it's going to guide you through the platform. We have an entire library of on-demand training videos that are fairly short form, 5 to 8 minutes, depending on the content. Those are accompanied by certification quizzes to make sure that everyone understands the content in the training. We also have live instructor-led group training every week. Those are pretty small classrooms. We have, let's call it 5 to 10 people in those classrooms, and it gives everyone the opportunity to ask questions and to participate in that learning. And so there's all of these different channels where you can get in and learn, whether it's reading on your own or watching the videos on your own and checking with those quizzes, if it's joining in those weekly scheduled instructor-led trainings. And then finally, it's going into that coaching. And that's the point I made earlier as well, is that we want to get into that coaching and talk about your business and how we can hit the goals that you have. We don't want to get into coaching and talk about this is LASSO, right? And so we want to accomplish as much of that as possible so we can hit the ground running when you have a team member in that room with you as well.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you mentioned a lot of things there. So again, whether people are evaluating, an operating system like LASSO, an inventory system, a CRM, I think making sure and doing your due diligence to understand how big is that team that's going to be able to support you. Do they have a well-defined process, or is it, oh, we just got this person we're going to put you with and they're going to train you? Access to content, access to other peers in the industry who are maybe a few months ahead of you or a few years ahead of you, and understanding best practices with that. Accessibility of those people, willingness to come on site, really having somebody who is going to meet you where you are and really kind of take your hand and lead you through it. When I think about some of the implementations we've done and the ones that have been the most successful, it is those people who I feel like have literally been by our side. And we've implemented some big softwares here at LASSO of different tools that we use ourselves internally. And those are just the good ones, right? The ones who are willing, they give me their cell phone, right? I know our team does that. I know you've got such an incredible team, Thomas, many of whom are from the industry. They understand the talk track. They've lived the life that our customers have. And it's one of the things I admire most is the way that they care for our customers. They show up, they help, they spend the extra time. And it's without us nickeling and diming them and saying, oh, well, if you want another phone call, you need to pay for it. So I really like that aspect of it. And I hope to see more companies follow suit, because if you're going to invest in a big platform, you want to make sure that on the back end, there's going to be a team there to really kind of help you. So I think that's an important piece. Is there any kind of final advice that you would give to, again, whether they're implementing LASSO or anything, what's the biggest thing you think they can do that will impact the outcome for them?
Yeah. Well, one you mentioned earlier, which is, if you're evaluating a provider, I would ask them what implementation and onboarding looks like, ask them what training looks like. They should be able to spit out a really clear answer the way I have today. If they can't, if they tell you, hey, we have a dedicated team, you have your dedicated account manager, and that's it, then there's a good chance your dedicated account manager may not be quite as available as you'd like them to be, and you're going to be stuck without resources. So I would just do your diligence, ask those questions. In terms of getting your team ready to make a transition like this, like to LASSO specifically, we do have a really well-defined process, and you can trust that process, and that's important. We've done this for thousands of clients. We can bring you through really successfully. So all you really need to do on your end is own that communication with your team so they understand why they're doing this and why it's important and what's required or expected. And then you've got to capture some of your data for us. But that's really it. You can show up with a team that understands why they're here, and you can give us the data that you need. We can put you into this process and bring you through successfully.
One final question. How long should a company anticipate it taking to go through implementation?
I'm going to answer as if someone has everything that LASSO has to offer. I'd like to see that take 3 months, considering we take a good amount of time in that coaching period. We don't want to check our boxes and say, you've done the training, we're sending you off. We want to physically see those things happening for your team. And that can take a little longer, waiting for events to happen, waiting for execution. So we're going to spend the time in coaching, and I want to see that happen in 3 months.
Awesome. Super helpful. And that's if they're buying all dozen products or what have you that we have.
Yeah, and we've seen clients move through quicker than that. We've seen clients take significantly longer, right? And the difference between those two people, we've outlined really clearly here today. It's who's showing up, and they've got the commitment from themselves and their team. They have the right people leading, that project, and they're able to get us the information we need quickly, and they're going to trust the process. Those people are going to move through really quickly. Our goal is to get through as quickly as possible. The North Star for our team is to make sure every client's effectively using the platform at a high level as quickly as possible. So that's consistently our goal. We're going to try to do that. And then if some of those elements are missing, we talked about them today, it typically does take a bit longer. We're still going to be with you to make sure it happens, but it can take longer.
I love that. Dual ownership. We all own our part in it, right? Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Thomas. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, if you all like what you hear, don't forget to hit subscribe. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, reach out to us at podcast@lasso.io.